So let's continue the show from here. What is just coming through from the International Monetary Fund says it's concluded a staff visit to Nigeria, September 27 to October the 7th, issued what you called a report after such visits to countries from members of the IMF. Part of the report we told you earlier, the IMF says Nigeria's current account deficit is expected to persist while the pace of capital outflows continue to weigh on Nigeria's international reserves. The IMF says inflation will likely peak up in 2020 on the back of the new minimum wage, higher VAT, despite tight monetary policy environment. Growth for next year for Nigeria, according to the IMF, is expected to peak up to 2.3%. For budget 2020, Nigeria is projecting a growth of 3%. The IMF says it will be 2.3% this year. For next year, 2020, by the government, 3%. Moving forward, the IMF also spoke about the new Economic Advisory Council, says such a council is urgently needed to reduce vulnerability and raise growth. It says a comprehensive package of measures are needed by the Buhari's administration. Speaking to the central bank, the IMF report says a tight monetary policy should be maintained through more conventional tools. The IMF says the central bank should stop direct interventions but introduce longer-term government instruments to mop up excess liquidity and move towards a uniform market-determined exchange rate. These are some of what is contained here in this report just coming through this morning. So let's get Ayobami Oyalawo, who is a political economist, to talk to us about yesterday's budget and economic state of the economy presentation by Mr. President. Ayobami, it's good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, boss, and good morning.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm sure we've had enough time to sleep over this budget presentation and some economic issues Mr. President raised. What's your summary of it?
Well, my summary of it is about, I put them in 4 bullet points in terms of the entire package from the president. And I'll quickly read them out here as one, it's a pro-people budget. Secondly, it's a pro-growth budget. And thirdly, it's a pro-state budget. And fourth, it's a pro-development budget. Let me quickly highlight them here. For the one I call pro-people, we realize that VAT has been increased. But the good thing about it is that most of the taxable items in terms of VAT are items that generally will not affect those who are poor. I remember the day I first said it here, some people went ahead to insult whatever they can out of my life, but the truth remains that the president confirmed what I said yesterday by taking out most of the agricultural items and items that will be needed by the poor people, including water, nuts, and so many other items that we all consume, whether poor or rich, have been taken out of VAT taxable items, so which for me is a pro-people approach. And then I say it's a pro-growth approach because even though the capital budget is smaller, a lot has been allocated into infrastructural development. So it's a good one in that area. And if that happens, the good thing there will be that it will stimulate economic growth, so that we can be able to put ourselves in line, and also it will also create jobs. So and then when you create jobs, definitely you're going to bring more prosperity to your people. So thirdly, I say it's a pro-state. The VAT that has been increased, even though it will not affect the poor so much, yet the state will benefit more because 55% of VAT will go to the state. So it's a pro-state budget, and I hope our subnationals at our state and the local government will cash into this and ensure that there is more transparency and accountability in the state. That is the best way you can appreciate the advantage of giving more of the VAT that will be accruing to the federation, to the states. And finally, I say it's a pro-development budget because the threshold of VAT has been changed from what it was. Now, companies that are below 25 million or 25 million and below will not be taxed. So it will help the MSMEs to grow. And then you know clearly that most of the working population will be in the MSMEs. So it's an advantage to them. So I think these are areas where I looked at it from, and I think it will be good for Nigeria in the long term if we adhere strictly to some of these things.
The president said part of his speech yesterday and he says, yes, the budget is what he calls, I'm trying to get that direct, he says the principal fiscal tool for socio-economic development, but the country remain committed, the administration remain committed to prudently planning for our economic prosperity, future economic prosperity. So he says the timeline for Vision 2020 and ERGP expires next year. They should be pushed aside, and the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning should come up with a new national economic development. What does this mean to you about yesterday's presentation by Mr. President beyond the usual allotment of figures into various MDAs?
I totally agree with the president in that area. We all know the ARGP was brought in as an intervention vehicle when we just exited, what was it now?
Recession?
We know we were in a recession. So when we just exited recession, we needed that medium and a short-term plan. And that ARGP has done its job, even though I think it didn't really achieve as much as it should, but it has helped us to move away from where we are. I think the president is right in that area. We need a much more easy-to-use document. The ARGP is about 200 pages. It's too bulky. So two things I would want to see now is a document that is less complicated, simpler to understand, and secondly, very important, a document that the states will key into. Because you see, no matter what the federal government does, we need to understand this clearly. The development of our people lies in the subnationals. We will not grow if our state government don't get it right. So I want to see a document that will incorporate whatever the federal government is doing into what the states are doing. Right now, we can see a lot of development here and there, but it is not organized. And I'll give you some example. We are a country that has about 200 million people, so we need a lot of food. Now, some states like Kebbi and Niger State, Kano State, and so we are the first state to key into this rice stuff, and they've done very well. Right? Suddenly, I mean, recently, we've seen Ebonyi, Anambra, Kogi, and other states keying into it. But you see, these things are too haphazard. So I want to see a document that will harmonize both the federal and the state into a whole document. And it is still simple. I don't want a 200-page document, for God's sake. It's still difficult to read. It's very complicated. So we want a less complicated document. We want a document that all states, federal and local government can key into, so that we will have a development that goes together in sync from one to the other. We don't want something that is jumbled and mumbo-jumbo, such that even though development are there, you cannot codify it into one document. So it's going to be a better document, hopefully. And I think the president is right. I support him completely. We want something that is much more medium and longer term. We can't continue to do interventionism. So I think it's good for us in the long run if we understand this and we do it correctly.
So in terms of, yes, this is going to, Mr. President says to medium to long term. In terms of the number of years, how long do you think this new national development plan that Mr. President raised the curtain on yesterday should be? Should it be 4 years, 5 years? Definitely to have to outlast its administration by 2023.
Exactly.
So do you think it should be a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years?
I think we should do a 5 years document, so that after 5 years, you can now have a review of how well that has performed. Then you can now look at if you want to continue, or you want to add new things, or you want to completely jettison it. So I think a 5 years document is better, even though it will at last is our own government. Whoever is coming in will now be able to look at it in another another 1 or 2 years and see how well it has done. So a medium-term document of 5 years for me will be better and will be much more accommodating in terms of how you can quickly look at how it has done, what it has done, and do you want to continue along that path, or you want to maybe tweak it here and there, or even completely jettison it.
Okay, let's specifically let's chat a little bit to the budget 2020 itself. So let's double down a little bit on those sectoral appropriations. Works and housing still takes the lion's share. It looks like Mr. President is particular about works and housing and power. They come next to each other, as it were, in terms of the size. But again, One thing Mr. President says for 2020, no new projects, budgeting for new projects by MDAs, complete what is on your hands. So do you think this budget seems to be a critical or a major departure from the previous budget in which figures for sectors keep rising? At the end of the day, Nigerians, we don't see the impact of this, but we don't see where the money goes, even though we have to fund this through external and domestic borrowings.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense not to introduce new project until you have finally completed the ones you are running. You see, we've had this in the past where you have a lot of abandoned projects. I remember when this president came in, one of the first things they did was, let's complete whatever my predecessors were doing. If you go to many of our states today, people just come in and then even some states some new governors comes in and destroy whatever the other ones have been doing. So I think it is clearly a departure from the past, and it makes a lot of sense. One, you don't introduce new project until you complete whatever you've budgeted for last year, so that the money that accrues to you will not be spread thin. Rather, you will be able to put it in to some of the projects that you're already doing. It makes a lot of sense. For me, I think we should applaud the president for understanding clearly that these are the problems we've been battling with and trying to put solutions that will bring more sense more sense and prudence into how we spend money. Because you budget for this year, you've not finished it, you budgeted for another thing this year. Next year you're going to abandon the other one. We've had this lot of misconception and misuse of funds, even though we all know that clearly funds are hard to come by. And I agree with the president. I think it is the right thing to do.
Okay, so if we, this just came in this morning, just a few minutes before we came on air. I'm not sure you've had enough time to go through it. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, concluded their visit to Nigeria and says, look, we need to fix a few things. Says under the current policies, our GDP for this year will be at best 2.3%, but then we have major problem to fix. Recovery is still slow and sluggish, and says we need a total package of economic reform, and with the new Economic Advisory Council together. So put this, if we put this 10.3 trillion naira budget within the bigger size of the economy, what would you like to see moving forward as far as the next 4 years of the administration is concerned?
Well, the government is putting growth at 3%. The IMF is putting it at 2.3, about a difference of about 0.7, which is, well, it's fair enough. I think one of the things I like to see is that, because it's something I've been saying, we've had a huge population growth compared to the economic growth. So I think there should be some form of, I don't know if you can put it as policy, but maybe the religious and the traditional institutions should help us. I was watching your news last week when a mosque somewhere, or is it a mosque or a reform house somewhere in Kaduna, was the police went there, and one man was speaking, that man particularly, that said he had 40 children. And you see one man producing 40 children is a disaster for an economy that is growing slowly. So we need to check our population growth to align with our economic growth. How we're going to do that, I really don't know right now, but clearly there is a problem somewhere. We are growing slower than the population is growing, and it's dangerous for us. We cannot sustain it. We cannot just become a big-for-nothing economy. I forgot to add earlier on that the budget for housing and power is a pointer to where this government wants to go. When you spend on those areas, clearly you're going to create two things. One, development, and then prosperity, because you're going to create jobs. You're going to create primary and secondary jobs, and even tertiary, because when our roads are good, I work in the agri sector, and we know some of the problems we have faced where goods coming in from the rural areas, most of them got destroyed because movement from one point to another is a challenge. I think it's good. And also, the budget for transport is also a pointer to that fact. So in those areas, I think I'm saying positive. My fear, like I always say, is are we going to stick to these things? Are we going to do them correctly? Because if you have good intention, but you have poor implementation, on the long run, you're not going to get anywhere. So When you put that side by side with what the IMF has just said this morning, there are challenges. I won't sit down here and lie that there are no challenges, but these are challenges that we can summon. But do we have the courage? Are we going to face the reality, or we're going to just continue to hide our head in the sand? That depends on how we want to look at it.
Ayobami Oyalawo, thank you so much, a political economist and head stakeholders management at NASA. Thank you so much for weighing those very important economic headlines we've had over the last 24 hours. Thank you so much from our Abuja studios, and we look forward to see more of you on the show in the future. It's going to be a little bit unsettling, as you may have heard over the last weeks and few months, about what the UK no-deal Brexit will mean. According to a new report, United Kingdom's debts could be as high as £100 billion if there is no deal for Brexit ready to go October the 31st. That's part of the news we're scratching our head all about this morning. So I'm asking my colleague Juliana Olayinka, who is out of our studios in London, to help us make some sense and get a sense of what this all means. Juliana, good morning. But let's start this from the economic data showing that UK's productivity is hitting a 5-year low. Is this all part of blame it on Brexit?
Good morning, Bosun. Yes, of course, every negative business headline that's come out of Britain over the past 3 years, some would say the scaremongers are blaming it on Brexit. But I must say this information is pretty important, because productivity in any economy, but particularly in the West, really kind of shows just how, you're growing and just where you're standing is in the world. And according to the Office for National Statistics, growth in the UK, labour growth in the UK has stalled at 0.5%. It actually contracted the 3 months from June, and that's Q2. And of course, they are citing Brexit. A lot of business investors, those who would have invested in Britain, particularly from the foreign lands, are not doing so. They're seen to be waiting for this Brexit uncertainty to clear, and that's not good news. Of course, we had that PMI composite data, and it showed that in manufacturing and contracting, the UK economy really is contracting. I think what was really worrying for economists is the service industry. Now, services, believe it or not, contributes 80% towards the United Kingdom's GDP. And we saw in September that that went below the 50 level, 50 being the benchmark for growth. So, when you add all of this data up, it's not looking good. Despite this, the FTSE actually opened 20 points higher this morning, but a lot of people are scrambling around now as that Brexit hard deadline, which is the October the 31st, counts down. People are looking at the numbers, and the numbers are not telling a good story.
Yes, Juliana, we have a bigger story. I have a bigger story to head scratch about, which is about UK's debt hitting £100 billion if there is no Brexit, if there's no deal for Brexit. How bad could this be for the UK?
Oh, well, pretty bad. Of course, the UK economy is still one of the largest economies in the world. And that's kind of the message that Boris Johnson and the Conservative government are putting through. They're kind of waving the old British flag and saying everything will be okay in Britain. But this is a pretty serious story. The story actually broke yesterday, and it was data that was compiled by the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And they showed that, yes, if the UK does indeed crash out, which will be an illegal crash out, because we know that Ben bill permits the Prime Minister to seek an extension, but he insists that he won't do that. So if indeed the Britain do crash out, they predict that government spending would increase by $100 billion, which even goes far and above regulation, because at the moment the UK government can only borrow 2% against GDP. And if this debt is correct, and a lot of senior analysts in the city have compiled this data, then that means borrowing would go to 2.3%. Yesterday, it broke. The reason why people weren't discussing it yesterday is because they wasn't sure where this deal was going. But now that it seems as if talks have completely collapsed following that explosive row yesterday morning between Angela Merkel and Boris Johnson, it seems that there is no deal. And the fact that we may be leaving without a deal is becoming increasingly likely. The Treasury have responded. A lot of observers in the UK are waiting for the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the Finance Minister, Sajid Javid, to release his first budget. Now, they responded, basically not denying it, but not agreeing with it. They said that the only thing they will be focusing on are domestic policies, so that of the NHS, our health and schools. But again, another
interesting quite a lot.
Problem with Brexit and some of the financial implications and consequences of crashing out.
Yes, quite a lot there. Brexit is taking 3 years, and it's not looking any easier to pass through the eye of the needle, symbolically speaking, as it were. I'm sure you have a lot more time in the afternoon at 1:30 on Business Incorporated to drill down a little bit more into all of this, getting us to understand where we're on the Brexit train. Thank you, Juliana. Have a great time, and see you after lunch. Did you notice Mr. President spoke about the capital market yesterday in the budget? That's what we're talking about when we come back.